So it's that time for the Setty Report again. Madhava, what do you got for us here today?
Well, today we're going to talk about the Israeli data, which is very, very important. Um, we hit upon the statement that Fauci and Dr. Walensky were making last month about 99% of people who are dying and getting hospitalized are unvaccinated. And in that particular report, we were dealing with some limitations because the CDC is not telling us the vaccine status of those who are dying or being hospitalized. Now we're looking at the Israeli data, and they have the decency of at least telling us what the vaccine status is of people who are dying or getting hospitalized. So that's what would like to talk about today. The claims from Fauci and Walensky that 99% of people who are dying are unvaccinated is an extremely important claim to break apart. And I keep hammering away at this because what they're saying is that the vaccines are 99% effective, or the risk reduction is 99%, more or less. And that is a huge claim to make, and it cannot be true. And now the Israeli data, as we're about to demonstrate, it proves that they cannot be right. And the reason why this is important is that when our administrators and authorities are making that claim, it compels people to get the vaccine. It's like a no-brainer, right? But the secondary impact is that it gives ammunition to that side to attack people who remain vaccine cautionary and unvaccinated. It's like, oh my gosh, what kind of idiot would not get a vaccine when you have those kinds of numbers? So it's a incredibly impactful statement that they're making, and it's not true. And that's why the Israeli data is so important to examine. So I downloaded this information directly from the government of Israel, and it's in Hebrew, and you can easily translate it. I put it into a number cruncher on my Mac and made these plots. The first plot I want to look at is the number of deaths in the unvaxxed population in Israel, starting from December 20th, 2020. Okay, here it is. It's a bar graph, and we see the number of deaths in the unvaccinated. Again, this is very important. They're telling us that these people were actually unvaccinated. That's not what the CDC does. You can see that around January and February, there were a large number of deaths that peaked, and it tailed off into the summer months. This goes all the way into mid-July. Now, we'll look at the same thing with people who are fully vaccinated. Look at the scale. I want to be very clear. The y-axis, the scale on the left, it's smaller. So there's fewer deaths in the fully vaccinated. But you cannot make this comparison and say, oh my gosh, there are more deaths in the unvaccinated compared to the vaccinated, because it implies when we're trying to calculate the efficacy of the vaccine, you have to compare how many people were in the unvaccinated group compared to how many people are in the vaccinated group, right? We cannot, without making that analysis, we assume that if the pools of people are the same, then clearly the vaccine is working. But that is not at all the case. Is that clear to everybody? Does that make sense to you, Joe?
Essentially, as the unvaccinated group becomes smaller, a single death has a greater impact.
Absolutely. That's exactly right. So, it's if 99% of people are unvaccinated and 99% of the deaths are occurring in the unvaccinated, that means the vaccine is not doing anything, right? On the other hand, if half the people are unvaccinated and half the people are vaccinated, and the deaths are 99% in the unvaccinated, then of course the vaccine is doing an amazing job. So we have to correct for the sizes of the population. And so here is a plot of the percentage of people that became fully vaccinated over time in Israel. This is pulled from Our World in Data. And you see that in the beginning of the time period, there was almost nobody who were vaccinated. Why? Because they had to, stick everybody with the vaccine. And then it takes 4 weeks for them to get the second jab. So we see it grow actually quite quickly compared to our country, and basically show up at around 58, 59% after about 7 months. So what we need to do here in order to make a fair comparison is adjust the number of deaths by the percentage of people who are vaccinated. So now I'd like to bring up the next graph. If you look now in blue, this is the adjusted number of unvaccinated deaths in blue compared to the adjusted vaccinated deaths in green. In the beginning, we see that they're pretty comparable. And then there's a period where the unvaccinated deaths clearly are larger than the vaccinated deaths. And then, interestingly, they both decline. And you can see that near the end, at the tail end of this time period, the unvaccinated deaths are lower than the vaccinated deaths. Is that clear?
Yeah, absolutely. Do we have an explanation for why in that middle portion there's such a big gap?
Well, the most fair assumption we can make is that the vaccine is doing something. It's helping the people who have been vaccinated against death. There's no question about that. It would be disingenuous of me to ignore that possibility. I mean, that's kind of what it implies.
And we're probably seeing that's mainly like elderly, those who are more exposed to potentially dying of COVID in general.
Well, that's a really good supposition, and I have to say that that data is given, but I did not break it down by age, which is the way the data had been parsed by the Israeli government. The data that I saw did not have it broken down by comorbidities. So we're only making assumptions here. I'm just looking at numbers as a whole in order to be able to calculate the efficacy of the vaccine in preventing death in the end.
Perfect.
Okay?
Yep.
Now I'm going to show you as on a week-to-week basis how good the vaccine is. In other words, what is the vaccine effectiveness? And this is a plot that's all in blue, and it peaks at 100%. You cannot have a vaccine that's more than 100% effective. But notice that throughout this time period, the vaccine actually becomes less effective, in fact, dropping below zero. Whenever it drops below zero, that means there are more people dying in the vaccinated group than in the unvaccinated group.
Yeah.
Is that clear?
Yep.
And to be very clear here, we're actually looking at a very small number of people. So in a given week, if there were 2 people that died in the vaccinated group and 1 person that died in the unvaxxed group, you would calculate a negative vaccine effectiveness.
Yep.
And let me be clear here. Effectiveness and efficacy are basically the same with a slight difference. Efficacy refers to what happens in a clinical controlled trial. Effectiveness is how it performs in the general population. So we're looking at vaccine effectiveness because this is not a trial. This is what's happening in the population of Israel. So with those things aside, I want to just point out the fact that this graph demonstrates that the vaccine effectiveness is moving around. Now, recall that the calculated efficacy of the vaccine from the trials was 90% in preventing severe COVID. We don't have any numbers from the vaccine trial about preventing death because nobody died in the Pfizer trial, so we don't know. So we're looking here, I'm just telling you the number for severe COVID, and that was 90%. You can see here that most of the time, the vaccine effectiveness is less than that number. And in those periods where it exceeded 90%, those happen to be weeks where very few deaths were occurring. So a proper way of examining this is adding up all of the people who died who were unvaccinated and all the people who died who were vaccinated. What do we get? Well, adjusting for the changing populations, the number is 58.5%. That is the vaccine efficacy in preventing death in the Israeli population. This is an important point to make, okay? Because 58.5% is vastly less than 99%. It's not just a matter of 41% difference. We're talking about the how many more times, how much bigger the dead unvaccinated population is compared to the vaccinated population. And when Fauci claims it's 99%, he's saying there's 99 times more people in the unvaccinated group who died. 58.5% is far, far less. That points out something much different about the efficacy of the vaccine. It's nowhere near as effective as our authorities are claiming, at least with respect to Israel. So, just from a purely logical perspective, it's almost impossible for the same Pfizer vaccine to be so much less effective in Israel compared to what they're claiming about what's happening in the United States. It can't be. This
Right.
is a large difference in claims. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so just to go back, I remember at the beginning of this whole vaccine was about to be rolled out, they said Pfizer was about 95, 96% efficacy in the trials. We now bring it down into the effectiveness, so what it's actually doing in the population, and you're saying that based on this data, it's something in and around 58%. Is that what you're suggesting?
That's exactly right. It's 58.5% effective in preventing death.
Based on their data.
I beg your pardon?
Based on their data.
Based on their data.
Yeah.
But their data is better than our data because they're telling us what the vaccination status is of the people who are dying. That's
Yeah.
not what the CDC is doing. That's not what our state's departments of health are doing.
Right.
They're just telling us vaccine rates and how many people are dying. So we
Right.
have to, make assumptions and draw correlations, which is what we did in a previous video. Hopefully, folks have seen that, and that's where it's explained in more detail. But now we have hard data that is hard to refute. The number is 58.5%. And
Right.
approximately. And the reason why I say approximately, to be completely transparent, is that for some reason, Israel, whenever deaths in a given week were less than 5, they just said less than 5. They did not say 1 or 2 or 3 or 4. So I had to make some assumptions, and across the board, wherever there was a week where less than 5 deaths were reported, I made it 3, whether unvaccinated or vaccinated, to make
Yeah.
a fair comparison. And the number that I've calculated is 58.5% vaccine efficacy based on those assumptions, which I think are very fair.
Right, and so that's to stop deaths. Now, a lot of people are going to argue, well, part of this vaccine was really to stop infection and over hospitalization, taxation on the system, that sort of thing. So, do we have that data as well?
Well, yes, we do. So deaths are one thing, and I believe you said that the point of the vaccine was to prevent infections. No, the point of the vaccine was to prevent severe infections,
Yep.
to keep people out of the hospital and to keep people from dying, obviously. So now let's look at what you just brought up there, which is hospitalizations. We have that data as well. Once again, Israel has been transparent and told us of the people hospitalized who has been vaccinated and who has not.
Yeah.
So let's go look at that now. So I'll spare you the breakdown that we did for the deaths and come right to this plot here, which is equivalent to what we demonstrated with deaths. The blue line again is the hospitalizations in the unvaccinated, and the green line is the hospitalizations in the fully vaccinated population. And once again, we see that it starts off, they're about the same, and then there's a period where the vaccination is helping people stay out of the hospital. There's no question about that. But once again, towards the end of the time period, they seem to be right on top of each other again. This means that the protection of the vaccine is waning over time. So there you have it. So let's look at the vaccine effectiveness plot now. So week by week, comparing the two numbers, we can calculate how effective the vaccine is. And as you can see in the middle of this time period, the vaccine effectiveness is what looks like about 85% for a few months, and then it wanes, right? So, in order to look at this and make a conclusion about how good the vaccine is over a period of time, we add up everything on the unvaccinated and vaccinated side, and we calculate an efficacy, and that efficacy is 66.9%.
Right.
It's not bad, right? And it's almost predictable because, to be honest with you, it's quite good. If we were to compare that efficacy to what we do on a very, very good flu season, where we happen to identify the strains that are going to affect the population, and make and design a vaccine to protect us from those strains, we get about, in the high 60s. That's the best we've ever done. In general, flu vaccines are around 50, and in some years it's worse than that. So 66.9% is admirable. But the point here again is that it does not compare to what was found in the trials for the Pfizer vaccine when we looked at severe COVID. I'm equating severe COVID with hospitalizations. That's all we can do here. 66.9% is much, much worse than 90%. And here's the point I'm trying to make here. A 66% vaccine efficacy means there are 3 times more people who are unvaccinated that are getting hospitalized. It's much less than a factor of 9, which is what our governments are claiming. And when Fauci says 99%, that's about 99 times. So these are numbers that cannot be reconciled.
Yeah.
Statistically. I'm sorry. That's the way it is. That's what we know.
So it's like culturally from a governmental and a media level, it's misrepresenting what the data is actually saying. It's using a lot of sort of extreme headlines and extreme statements to overstate what's actually going on. And what's interesting about this for me too is, as much as we talk about these numbers, those numbers all still have to be spoken about in the context of a virus or of a situation where, the vast majority of people, even who do get it, I think the percentage, and I can't say this for sure right now, but I recall back in 2020, the amount of people who ended up in hospital who had COVID. So you get COVID, what percentage of people end up in hospital? It's something like 1%. So we're still talking about a virus that's not sending everybody to the hospital. It's not a death sentence. But within that 1% of people, right, this is where we're getting into the interesting data. So it's just that context I find so important to help mitigate the fear. There's not enough of that happening in the mainstream dialogue, I find.
You're absolutely right. It's not happening, and it's very difficult for the average person to refute what they're saying or to even challenge that.
Yeah.
And what you're talking about there is absolute risk, which is versus relative risk. So when we compare vaccine to placebo, we are making a calculation about relative risk, and those numbers, are high, 90%, 70%, whatever. But the absolute risk of getting the infection is very low.
Yeah. That's it. That's all. Once again, an excellent breakdown of what's going on here with the vaccine. Thanks so much for another good study report here.
You're welcome, Joe, and thank you all for your curiosity and desire to know more. Stay sharp, everybody.